Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian out here in Virginia, where we're visiting with the National Air and Space Museum's Udvar Hazy Center, which is hosting the Great British Fly-In, a collection of warbirds with World War II heritage, particularly if they have an association with the Royal Air Force, as the world's first independent Air Force celebrates its centenary. Whole bunch of celebrations that happen in London coinciding with April 1, 1918, with the founding of the RAF, but celebrations here this weekend and into next week. And we're over here with Dave Rohrer, who is the president and CEO of the Canadian Heritage Warplane Museum, just outside Toronto. You guys have an extraordinary collection, and I want to talk to you about that. But first, there are only two flying Lancasters in the world, one of the most distinguished bombers of World War II, the only bomber that could carry a 20,000-pound bomb load, as we saw with the weapon that sank the Tirpitz and executed so many other complex missions, the dam busters as well. Yes. Talk to us, sir, why it's so important for you guys to be here this weekend and for these celebrations.
Well, thank you. Nice to be here, Vago. We're really honored to be here to celebrate the Royal Air Force 100. And we were allies, of course, in World War II and part of the British Empire. And we were the only other country to build Lancasters. We built 430 Lancasters, and this is the last flying Canadian-built Lancaster. And, of course, we were a large part of Bomber Command and served from 39 to 45 in Bomber Command, flying Lancasters and Halifaxes. And the Lancaster, of course, was the heaviest payload and fastest and biggest bomber that we flew during that effort.
So tell us a little bit about how this airplane is very, very uniquely painted. Everybody remembers the dam busters. Talk to us a little bit about it, because half the airplane is in Canadian colors and the other half is in RAF colors.
Yes, well, when we restored the airplane, this airplane came off the line in April 1945 in Toronto, the site of Pearson Airport today, Victory Aircraft. And it was going to go to the war effort, but of course the war in the European theater ended in May of 1945. So it was going to be put in storage and then re-rolled to Tiger Force for the Pacific theater. And of course, by the time it was ready to do that, that theater ended in August of 45. So it actually ended up in storage for about 18 months, and then eventually got re-rolled into maritime reconnaissance and rescue with the Royal Canadian Air Force until 1963. It was decommissioned in 1963 and ended up as a gate guardian in Goderich, Ontario, on the shores of Lake Huron, and sat there until 1977, when it was probably the largest bird's nest in Ontario. We were able to pick it up for $10,000 and brought it back to the museum and started an 11-year restoration. And in 1988 flew the airplane. Now, when we marked the airplane originally, we marked it as KB726, and we called it the Mynarski Memorial Lancaster. And the reason we did that was Andrew Mynarski was an mid-upper gunner from Manitoba, and it was a Canadian crew, 419 Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force. They were in Cambrai, France, bombing rail yards on the night of June 13, 1943, got hit by fighters, and the captain called a bailout. And Andrew Mynarski's best friend was the tail gunner, Pat Brophy. And so when he went to jump out the door that everybody will walk out when they do the tour, he noticed that his tail gunner, his friend, was in trouble, and the turret wouldn't free himself and he couldn't get out. So he crawled through a fire to try and help his friend, and they didn't get anywhere. The airplane's coming down. His friend said, "Save yourself." And so he crawled back through the fire and jumped to his death because his parachute was on fire. The airplane crashed with Pat Brophy in the tail turret. The tail turret was thrown clear, landed in a hay mound, and Pat Brophy lived to tell the story. So Andrew Mynarski was awarded the Victoria Cross posthumously. So we have the Victoria Cross on the right side of the airplane in honor of the Andrew Mynarski Memorial Lancaster. When we flew the airplane in 1988, we had the entire crew with us, except for Andrew Mynarski. So we always leave the right side marked that way. But the left side we do change every now and again, and of course this year being the 75th anniversary of 617 Squadron, the Dam Busters, of which we had a number of Canadians who were on that squadron, we've marked it as the Dam Buster, Guy Gibson's lead aircraft, and we put a special symbol under the pilot's window.
And for the handful of people who don't know who the dam busters were, talk to us a little bit about the dam busters and their extraordinary mission.
Well, the dam busters were, we stayed, when we did a tour, we took this airplane over in 2014 to England to fly with the only other flying Lancaster in the world, owned by the Royal Air Force at the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. And we stayed at the Petwood Hotel in Woodhall Spa, which was the officers' mess for the Dam Buster Squadron. So they're all, all the paraphernalia, all the history is in the pub, in the bar. And there's a twig about 12 feet long. It's not a twig, it's a branch 12 feet long over the bar. And I asked, what's that all about? And they said, well, for the first 4 months, they didn't have a mission, and it was top secret. And all the other squadrons were a little peeved at them because they weren't pulling their weight in the effort. But what they were doing was they were learning how to fly at 50 feet at night. And this particular branch came home in the nose of a Lancaster and still is in the Petwood bar. But what they were doing was perfecting their night flying skills in order to attack the 3 dams, the Moan, and particularly, which they really did penetrate and attack, in order to try and attack the infrastructure and the war machine of the Third Reich in building war machines to carry their war effort on. So it was a high-risk mission, and we had a number of Canadians who lost their life in that mission. And so we wanted to recognize that. We wanted to recognize RAF 100, and we just thought it was a 75th anniversary. And I understand that there's going to be an important announcement on Tuesday night about 617 Squadron, and so we wanted to show our support for all of that.
That's right. And with Barnes Wallace's extraordinary bouncing bombs, without which busting those dams would have been impossible.
In fact, we had coffee one morning in the Petwood in the officers' mess at 617 with Mary, who was his daughter, who, when he was experimenting in the house and in the movie, oh, Mary, get the ball. And Mary's now about 85 years old and a lovely lady.
Oh, that's wonderful. Let me ask you a little bit about the museum, your guys' collection. Like a lot of other great aviation collections, you guys had a setback some years ago. Talk to us about what's in the collection today, so that when folks, and if anybody's visiting Niagara Falls or anybody's visiting Toronto, they should go to Mount Hope, which is in Ontario, which is about 30 minutes from, if I'm right, 30 minutes from Niagara Falls and about 30 or 40 minutes from Toronto, to see you guys.
Yes, absolutely. We're right at the west end of Lake Ontario. We're Canada's largest flying museum. We have a 105,000 square foot hangar. We're non-government funded, we're non-corporate funded, we're basically survive as an entity unto ourselves. We have the only flying Lancaster on this side of the ocean, and one of 2, and it's the only civilian-owned one today. We've flown it longer than Royal Canadian Air Force has. We have about a total of about 45 aircraft in the collection. We fly about 22 of them. We have all the British Commonwealth Air Training Program training airplanes we fly. We have a B-25, we have a Cancel PBY, we have a C-47 that flew on D-Day. We have all the Texans or Harvards, the Stearmans and Cornells and Tiger Moss. We have a Norseman, which was used in Canada quite a bit. So we have a large flying contingency. We have a great presence at www.warplane.com. You'll see our facility, see our museum. We have a good retail store. You can buy many things about Lancasters there. We survive because of our volunteers. We have a small staff of about 25 full-time people, and the rest, all the talent and expertise, comes from our tremendous group of volunteers. We have about 2,400 members, and we're a tourist attraction that's well received, and we carry on the heritage of the Royal Canadian Air Force is our mandate, and as we say, we make history fly.
And let me ask you about your background. You're a pilot. We're a pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force. Talk to us about what you did while you were on active duty.
Yes, I joined the Air Force out of high school and went to university under the ROTP training program. Did a 4-year degree at the University of Windsor. In the summers, I did my basic training, started my elementary flying training in Portage La Prairie, Manitoba. Eventually got my wings in 1975 on Tudors, the snowbird airplane. Right. Instructed on Tudors, and then we were also buying a lot of tactical aviation helicopters, so I ended up doing a little bit of that, and then I went to F-5s, Freedom Fighter, and then I ended up promoting myself out of the cockpit, which wasn't a good thing, and eventually went to the reserves, and then I joined the equivalent of the NTSB. We called it the Canadian Transportation Safety Board. And then I ended up taking over aircraft flight services for Transport Canada, which was equivalent of the FAA. And retired from all that and got involved at the museum as a volunteer chief pilot 20 years ago, and then ended up becoming CEO and president, 14 years ago. So I've had just a tremendous thrill to be part of it, and it's such an honor to be part of this legacy and history. And I couldn't have imagined as a young pilot in the Air Force that I'd be able to do the things I've done. But I had a lot of fun in the Air Force, and we did a job as everybody does, but tremendous camaraderie, and we have that same feeling in our museum today, tremendous camaraderie amongst all of us. And it's an honor. And my wife, when I checked out on the Lancaster many years ago, my wife said, well, how do you feel? And I said, well, to be honest, I feel like I just joined a club more exclusive than the shuttle pilots.
And how many hours now do you have on the airplane, and what's it like to fly the Lancaster?
Well, I have, that's a good question. I'm probably approaching about 700 hours now on the airplane. And to fly the Lancaster, to fly a tailwheel airplane requires a certain approach and skill. And there are some tailwheel airplanes that are benign in their handling, and there are others that are more demanding. The meanest tailwheel airplane you'll ever fly is the Lancaster. A 4-engine tailwheel, free-casting tailwheel airplane can be a handful. She can act like a lady, and then every now and again you don't want to give her too much lead because she'll test every skill you have. And I've been there. But it's very maneuverable, much more maneuverable than I thought it would be. I fly a B-25, and a B-25 is a pilot's airplane. I mean, you wear it, you don't fly it, and it's highly maneuverable. So when I went from the 25 to the Lanc, I thought, well, heavy bomber, it's not going to be all that maneuverable. I was surprised it's actually quite maneuverable. But of course, you have to respect that you can erode energy pretty quickly when you start handling, especially if you put a vertical element in any of your handling. If you stay level, it'll maintain and airspeed won't erode. If you do a steep bank climbing turn, you'll erode airspeed pretty quickly. So you always have to be aware of your envelope. But you know what? It's a great airplane. It's really a sweetheart. And every now and again, you hope she likes you and treats you well.
And do you have a co-pilot station, or no? It's one flying station.
It was a one-pilot station during the war. We fly 2 pilots, which Transport Canada. So and there were 2 pilot stations for training.
Right.
And so we have, and in fact, VRA, which is the way we painted it on the right side, was a training airplane originally. So we have, before it went into service.
And you're lucky. At least that gear was in there from the very beginning, as opposed to having to be retrofitted in there. And the last question I have is, how big of a challenge is it running a museum like this with such a disparate collection? You're trying to keep them flying. Actually, that's the best way to keep the airplanes new and fresh, is to keep them flying on a regular basis. Talk to us about some of the challenges associated with doing that, especially with the younger generation that may not be as familiar with World War II. My generation was excited. We take our kids to it, but our kids' connection with it is a little more removed, given that we knew my dad was a World War II veteran. All of our circle of family, friends, and relatives were. Talk to us about the challenge of running a museum like this.
Well, it is a challenge, especially this museum, because we're not a government-funded museum and we don't have a large corporation behind us. So the business side of running this museum is extremely important. We run about a $5.5 million a year program, and we have to then find ways to raise $5.5 million every year. And we use a lot of talent. Our volunteers, whether master toolsmen, tradesmen, electricians, tool makers, that talent I couldn't ever afford to pay for. And they come and become members and freely donate their time and talent. So that helps us immensely. But the reality is that we have to do things outside of normal museum's operation to sustain the financial viability of the operation. So we do a lot of corporate events, we do weddings, we do a lot of youth programs, we've got a great education program. We do catering, a cafe, we have a large retail operation. We do obviously a very strong fundraising appeal and campaign, and we have a very supportive membership. But it's always a challenge. And in fact, when we were going to take the airplane over in 2014 to England, Although I was concerned about the operational risk of flying the airplane over the North Atlantic at 8,000 feet, I wasn't as concerned about that as I was the risk financially to the operation, because the trip cost us $1.2 million, and we had to come back with significant returns to make that effort worthwhile. Well, thanks to the goodness and the kind heart and support of all the people in the British Isles, we came back with $2.2 million. So,
That's extraordinary. How much an hour does she cost to fly? Because you have 4 Merlin engines that are humming on this thing.
Well, I just bought 500 gallons of avgas at Manassas, and I paid $5 a gallon. And this thing will burn 220 gallons an hour. So I got 2 hours of gas.
Dave, thanks so very much. Thanks for sharing the airplane with all of us. I hope that this outing is financially good for you guys, and just want to compel everybody and ask everybody, come on out, support the program, send a donation in. Let's keep these great airplanes flying. Dave, thanks very much.
You're welcome. We're proud to be here. We're happy to be here, and we're glad that Canada and the U.S. are all on the same side.